Hello students, this is Mrs. Moore, and this is lecture 8. Well, actually, you know what? Let's call this Unit 6, Lecture 1, okay? Because now we're moving into the making of the American Constitution. And last time I spoke with you, we were talking about the Treaty of Paris. We were talking about how now American principles laid out in the Declaration had to be somehow put into a governmental form to have those rights protected, how America has small r Republican ideals, which basically means representative government, and how can we do that, and how the state constitutions came up with some of their own ways of doing things, and that during the war, the Continental Congress drafted the Articles of Confederation, but how those weren't entirely satisfactory. They were fine for the war, but afterwards people began to see some flaws. They began to notice some trouble. So the first thing I actually want to mention is one thing that came out of the Revolution was what we would call an American culture. So we'll be taking basically a moment here to talk about the Declaration of Independence here. So the Revolution built a sense of common nationality. Thank you. That's my child yelling. He's excited about the Easter Bunny. Okay. One of the strongest ways that feeling of patriotism was fostered was to have an annual celebration, 4th of July, which we do every year. Basically, July 2nd was supposed to be July 4th, if that makes sense, was supposed to be Independence Day. However, Congress, interestingly, in 1777, Congress forgot to acknowledge the first anniversary of independence until the 4th. It should have been July 2nd, but it was a Congress not paying attention for 2 days. That's why it's going to be celebrated on the 4th instead. The celebration of Independence Day quickly became the most important public ritual in the U.S. Huge numbers of people from all walks of life suspended their normal routines in order to devote a day to parades, formal orations, and fireworks displays. In the process, the infant republic began to create its own myth of national identity that transcended local or regional concerns. Now, I think myth, not in the sense of something that isn't true, but in the sense of something that has a lot of story and pomp and circumstance behind it, like Betsy Ross. There's a lot more to her story than perhaps her truth, we might say. But we're building up all of this emotion around July 4th. So what John Adams said was that he expected people would solemnly devote themselves to God that day, thanking God for the American victory. There would be pomp and parade, shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and fireworks from one end of the continent into the other, from this time forward forevermore, he said. One thing that is interesting, I want you to think about how you celebrate July 4th, and maybe, I don't know whether you read the Declaration together as a family, or whether you have a barbecue or go to a parade or set off fireworks, or sometimes watch Rocky. I know one year we watched Rocky, because that's a movie that makes you feel pretty American. I would suggest sometime reading in, let's see, it's one of the Laura Ingalls Wilder's books. It's Little Town on the Prairie, and you can see how in those days, and I believe it's the 1880s, how 1870s, 1880s, how people who are building their own culture on the western frontier, how they still honor America. And there's a picnic and horse racing and lemonade, but people come together prayerfully and read the Declaration. And in fact, Laura and her sister Carrie, they know it by heart because they had to memorize it, which you students should feel good about, because you've had to memorize many amendments and things like that. So it's useful to know those things, but it's very reverent. And so it's nice to remember what a holiday is for, rather than just the goodies and the excitement that we get from the holiday, right? Which could apply to today as well, depending on how you think about that, right? Okay, and today's Easter for me. Let's talk a moment about how America's destiny and how America is going to be kind of in a unique situation. One thing we know about America is that it has the good fortune of being an ocean away from Europe. And so America is less likely to be meddled with by European powers. And we know now that their new western border is the Mississippi River after the Treaty of Paris. But there are still going to be skirmishes with the natives. That's going to go on for quite some time. We know the Spanish control Florida and Texas at this point, I think, too. And so there's still going to be trouble, but America has a kind of nice setup in being somewhat isolated in this new land where they're not having to fight traditions of monarchy, at least having taken place in America. That's over in Europe. So they have this kind of clean slate where they're building their own sort of government. So let's think about this. American nationalism embodied a stirring idea. This new nation, unlike the old world nations of Europe, it wasn't rooted in all those traditions that are very hard to overcome. Except for the natives, the people hadn't been there for centuries. And there wasn't any also notion of common ethnic descent. One thing that you will see when you study, for example, Italian unification or German unification or World War I, World War II, ethnicity plays a huge role in national identity. Ethnicity meaning, I know some of you struggled with this word. When I asked you what ethnicity Frederick Douglass's parents were, you said, what does that word mean? It means what color you are, what people you come from. And so America is different in that regard, that yes, a lot of its people are British, but we know that we have people from Scotland, Ireland, different places. So there is less of a connection to some European traditions as American traditions are built. That is a good, healthy thing as well. Also, America doesn't have any feudalistic ties like the Europeans have, where you have to be descended from someone who owned a lot of land to have a title and to be an aristocrat and to be important and to hold this position in government. That didn't exist. All men are created equal, right? So I just want you to understand, it can't be stressed enough how different America was and how fortunately situated for this kind of political experiment. So many people thought of the New World as singled out for special identity. Remember that whole idea of a shining city on the hill? John Adams proclaimed the opening of America as a grand scheme and design in Providence for the illumination and emancipation of the slavish part of mankind all over the earth. So the founding fathers, to include John Adams, many of them felt that God had chosen America to get rid of some of there is to be a place where there wouldn't be fighting over religion, fighting over ethnicity, being controlled by tyranny, that there's something special and beautiful and human beings becoming their best about that. So this, let's see. So patriots everywhere, they felt that America was thus destined to be leaders in the world, leading the world toward greater liberty and equality. So there you go. These are all really important ideas that you have to understand what it means to be American. And now let's look together briefly at the Articles of Confederation. We talked about that last